in Europe, in the United States, we've seen more and more. Let's say majority of the founders actually they are not from the let's say the hardware industry, so they brought in very different perspective compared to let's say hardware native sort of founders when they create companies, and whereas in Taiwan, I mean, just by the nature of our history, we have a lot of like hardware industry, electronic industries, semiconductor people. So founders are usually hardware background, and I think the major difference there is actually. What I see is that the Taiwanese founders, many of them actually they do incremental, let's say innovation, which is basically whatever they were doing in their previous companies, they were not comfortable with, and they believe it can be done better. As a result, they improve maybe 10%, 20% more, and create a new company, which is not exactly what innovation should be. So basically. I think quoting something that is kind of cliche, people think inside the box too much. So that's the first sort of signature. And I'm still looking for the entrepreneurs, whatever their background are, basically that could really come up with something that is outside of the box and trying to break through that first wall. And the second thing is that because we have a very complete ecosystem here, so you tend to rely on that ecosystem a lot. As a result, when you first set out to whether it's market development or business development, you tend to rely on the things that you're comfortable with, which unfortunately is not big enough. So if you're doing hardware businesses, the sort of like if you're trying to take a small cut of the value chain system inside if you think about like before we had semiconductor industry, when you design a chip, you're trying to sell to all the OEM companies, but their clients are like huge clients, right? You deploy it to that. But now if you're doing an IoT startup, you say, oh, I can actually help, let's say a big company like Pegatron or Quanta improve a certain part of their business. But that's stopped there. It's not a solution that gets into their clients. And so if that's that kind of innovation, you're severely limited in terms of the market size, even though you're dealing with that really world-class, really big potential clients. And the same solution might be able to find much wider and more scalable industries elsewhere. But just by the fact that it's easier, more comfortable to get potential clients here, we see founders spending lots of time just going back and forth in Neihu and Hsinchu and just focusing on that, the things that they feel that it's low-hanging fruits, but actually not. It's like if you work in Taiwan, you know that all the companies they're really. Most of the companies are not that interested in spending money on things that can help improve the efficiency more, or things like this and like that. That's not the nature of the Chinese companies. And as a result, even though they're close to you, it's the same language and they're familiar with hardware. It's not necessarily the best clients if you're doing B2B. So I think those are the two things that I observed the past 2 or 3 years after hearing many pitches, especially in the B2B side. Well, I think specifically when I refer to community and brand, I was referring to consumer electronics startups. And so if you're doing consumer electronics, I think today, I think luckily we do have a lot of let's put it this way. For example, there's a lot of open source communities, and the open source community like GitHub or like the ARM, the Raspberry Pi community is very active. But in Taiwan, because traditionally we have like really mature development environment, so our engineers tend to stay inside the system. They ask their senior engineers, they ask their colleagues, and they thought that they didn't need to go to the open source community, which is kind of a shame because that's actually where all the brainstorming and the things that are built there. So I think that's the first step. Whatever you're doing, whether you're doing software, you're doing hardware, there are a lot of open source communities that are very big. And if you're doing blockchain, that's by default the open source community. You have to get on the community to talk to other people. And so from there, you'll be able to know people that are working on the same things as you are and be able to build that thing. And maybe you can leverage something out of it and build a brand, at least within the developers. Another thing, if we're going to ask Taiwanese founders to do whatever American young people can do in terms of like branding on Kickstarter or Indiegogo, I guess it's sort of like it's a little bit asking too much. I wouldn't dream that growing up in Taiwan, you'll be able to execute the marketing campaign as well as a native American. But on the other hand, we do have the strengths where we are all developers, and so you can leverage on those sort of like developing sort of community and sort of get to the next step. Branding, again, it's the same thing with community where after 2 years, I really feel that this is something that by nature, I think Taiwanese people have a hard time to do. Most of the problem we see is that, okay, you might have some idea, but then execution is not there. Execution is like 80%, 60%, or 40%. And the one thing about branding is that if you're missing just 10%, you're not there. The 10% mistake could just wreck havoc. For example, you could have a very beautiful website, you could have a very beautiful app, you could have a very beautiful package, and then because the backend system people are not really engaged or not really like motivated to keep it working, and then the user they click one thing and it's broken. And don't underestimate that. So that's a web page. I mean, my product is awesome, but that's the overall branding. So it could be very simple things like filling out the type form and then click submit and nothing happens. User is part of the branding. I mean, it has to be there. And the same thing like when you open the box and things fall out in the wrong way and they drop on the floor. And another simple mistake is that, so if you're doing branding and you're selling consumer electronic product, we see that kind of mistakes. We saw that kind of mistakes in American founders as well. They ship to UK, then they give you a American product. I said, there's nothing. I mean, just buy a adapter. But that's not the point. The point is, these are your consumers. You have to really like care about them, and that kind of like things that can be avoided with extra care. If they're not taken off, you can do 95% of good job with just 5% of the bad job, and you pretty much just ruin your brand. Yeah. Put it this way, I think the in terms of marketing campaign, so we are not very familiar on how to. So in terms of marketing, so tools that you can use, we're still kind of like one generation lagging. Most of the Taiwanese spend their time on Line and on I don't know PPT, and which is not. Yes, we do spend a lot of time on Facebook, but we consume. Very few people create content on Facebook. So as a result, if you're doing consumer electronics, your first market should be in the United States. As a result, most of the natural sort of social networking skills that we acquire here, they are not directly applicable. The languages, the sort of methodologies, they are not directly applicable in the United States. Which is why one of the reasons why we've seen very few like Kickstarter campaign successful. By successful, I mean more than $1 million here in Taiwan. I think that's one of the reasons. Those jobs cannot be outsourced. Either you do it right, you do it right, or you don't do it, basically. Yeah. Actually, Silicon Valley has been leaning heavily now toward deep technology startups. I wrote about that. There were some signs like a year and a half ago, but now it's like super clear that all the tier 1 VCs that I'm talking to, I mean, they're really. You can call them anti-lean, so they're actually sort of like moving money back into the things that used to characterize Silicon Valley back in the 90s, which is kind of nice for us because we're based in France, and France has always been doing deep tech innovation. And even so much so that even because of that trend now, like Financial Times, the economists, they're talking about Paris being a good place to do investment because of all the deep tech sort of tradition. So that's one thing that's very sure in San Francisco, where the mood is now shifting toward, but obviously you have to apply the new methodology, the lean methodology, but then the core tech, now people care about it more and more. So Paris pretty much has been doing that for a while, so we're now seeing Silicon Valley VC coming to Paris quite often, a little bit too often. Taipei, I think you guys have done a good job here motivating the entrepreneurs. We're playing catch up against that for sure. A lot of the pieces in ecosystem are still not there. On the other hand, I think some of the theses I threw out the past 2 years, every time I gave a mentorship here or I gave a speech here, they remain valid. Methodology is just part of the picture. So you can learn methodology everywhere, whatever kind of startups you're doing. But then the scalable market, the size of the market is always the number one priority. If you try to scale a business in Taiwan, they say consumer service business or another, they say e-commerce companies, you should be aware that that's probably not a VC target because the scalability, the size of the market is not there, and you just have to find a market that you can scale internationally, sort of like country agnostic in a certain way. So that pretty much defines the Taiwanese startups to be more B2B than B2C actually. Yeah, that would be that's just my humble, I mean, by all means, I always say that there's two types of entrepreneurship. You can do exponential scale, you can do linear scale. Linear scale is more like bootstrapping. You can bootstrap for like 5-6 years, have a good business and make some money, but it's not VC target. So it's not a bad thing, it's just different type of startups. Yeah, so Tokyo last year, everyone was talking about FinTech. And I think what's interesting, I mean, San Francisco has always been, San Francisco is the center of the attention, so people knows what's happening there. Tokyo has been playing catch up, and the environment is now quite nice, and the result is still pending. We're still seeing very few like fast-growing startups. That really few. Compared to the sort of like atmosphere of entrepreneurship, the results are sort of paling in front of the atmosphere. And the reason is because that atmosphere features heavily the corporates. So you're seeing all the corporates doing open innovation, corporate ventures, and all that, which is very different from the situation of Silicon Valley or even Paris. So I think that kind of friendly environment driven by corporates might philosophically limit the growth of the startups. We tend to see startups in Tokyo that got into a comfortable sort of funding situation with a corporate VC at a decent valuation, but no money from independent VC. But then they started to hire people and grow very slowly. So they hire a lot of people, they try to manage the team. It took them 1 year to ship the products or ship the services. They forgot that they had to focus on the growth metrics. So they talk about ecosystem all the time as if ecosystem can just make a startup be successful. So those kind of like problem is a different problem compared to what we've been seeing here in Taipei. So result-wise, it was a little bit disappointing the past year in Tokyo actually, yeah. So this is very important to Taiwan. We are a hardware country, right? So we see a lot of startups trying to do IoT products, and so they talk about IoT, and there's a big data, and there's a play. I think that the whole question has always been, okay, how can I monetize the data, right? So that's always been a big question, and a lot of people fail to monetize the data. Actually, very few people were able to monetize the data. So the real important question for the Taiwanese, not just the startups but the big companies as well, is that okay, now you have the cloud. Yes, you have the cloud, sort of. Now you have all the sensors sending everything to the cloud. One thing missing in this country is that the capability of processing the data. So 4 years ago, no one had that capability outside of Google and maybe a little bit of Facebook. But now all the startups in US and Europe, they are using machine learning to sort of process the data and give a constructive feedback model contributing model that can allow those data to be used. Think about a smart building. If you have a lot of sensors, that's fine, but who is going to deal with the data? But now all the startups are using machine learning to train for a model, and the model will allow the cloud system to preempt or to notify. It's not just notifying there's something wrong, it's actually preempt and learn about the evolution of the building in terms of energy consumption, in terms of activity in different rooms, which is kind of dangerous in the sense to Taiwanese companies because we have so many IoT startups, but I haven't seen many that really implement this part. They talk about it, but in terms of implementation, it's kind of like green, yeah. So I think that's something that probably has to be, people have to put in more effort, basically. One principle, very important, even at seed stage, you need to get independent VCs money. There's good money and there's bad money, and there's smart money and dumb money. But one thing very clear, whatever money you get, if you don't get the real VC to invest in your seed stage, it's very difficult to raise Series A. By Series A, you're starting over again. If you couldn't get any VC to do investment in Series A, you pretty much kiss goodbye to VC money from Series B and onward. This is something that a lot of people, it's not a secret. People know that, but somehow people keep ignoring that. Some people delay the process because pitching the independent VCs are very different from corporate VCs or from the other, let's say, strategic investors. Because for strategic investors and corporate VC, their angle is not financial return. So when they come in, they might want something else. They might want you to work with them on business. They might give you a valuation that is generous because they don't know how to do valuation, which block you from raising money from real VCs that seek financial return and be able to invest in the disruptive startups. So we see that over and over again. It's the same thing in Silicon Valley because there's so much like corporate VC money chasing them from Japan, from China, and from United States. But you almost always see it every time if you have a corporate VC that actually did your seed round almost like completely. That's actually the best thing because by the next round you start over and people realize okay, already you have a high valuation from the previous round and we don't want to get in, and it gets kind of ugly. So whatever you do, whichever kind of way you get the money, try to raise from real VCs as early as possible. Yeah. Well, in general, still the scalability, right? So if you're doing something, I mean, whatever, it's the way you do it, then that's more important than that thing itself. And so which market are you trying to scale? Why are you doing it? And like some of the entrepreneurs I talk to, they say they're deploying the beta system in this kind of like environment. And when you question them, why are you doing it there and what happened there? Sometimes it's just random. In Taiwan, it's very common that it's random. Oh, we just happened to run into someone at a trade show and they say they want to try the system. But remember, every time yes, it's good to have someone try your system and deploy that. But every week, every month you spend on them. And if that's not a scalable market, you're wasting your time. You're getting some proof that it works, but why don't you prove the thing in a scalable market? Because you tried in one vertical, but that vertical is not the one you're going to scale eventually. I mean, I'm not a big fan of pivoting. I think usually pivoting is basically you just couldn't figure out a way to sell your product, and that's why you're changing. But then, if you're doing B2B solution, which might be the natural habitat of Taiwanese startups, then make sure that the first market you're attacking, that you're experimenting, that's the scalable market that has the right target market size globally, so that everything you do is not wasted, basically. I think stop complaining that it's difficult. Everything is difficult. I mean, the startups are difficult, hardware, software is the same. VCs are difficult. I mean, VC have their own challenges. I think complaining doesn't really change anything. I heard complaints more than I heard pitches, which is kind of weird. I mean, that's I think your mindset determines how you execute and how you define strategy. If your mindset is trapped in negativity and feeling that you're being betrayed by the whole world or something like that, that won't lead you to a very good strategy actually. I mean, as an entrepreneur, there will always be shitty things happening, and there will be some crisis, and you have to keep defining new strategies and lead your team. And especially if you, one thing I really want Taiwanese founders to stop doing is to complaining on Facebook. I think this is really childish. Everything you wrote, I mean, look at Travis Kalanick. I mean, he got caught on a video arguing with the driver. Now overnight, it's like around the world, right? And so it doesn't really help anything. You might get your friend to give you a like or give you a pat on the back, but everything is out in the public, and you don't know the kind of effect that has on your team, on your investors and all that. It doesn't really get you anything. I mean, you will never hear real founders complain about like, okay, how come people don't like my products, or this is so hard and stuff like that. At least not until they're successful. When they're successful, they can look back, 10 years ago it was super hard, to get that first. I mean, that's when you publish books and that kind of thing. Yeah. Okay. Stay positive, and you're the leader of the team, so you have to keep fighting. If you stop fighting and start whining, mostly negative for your team. It won't be positive.